Competitive Pokémon is a unique case in the world of esports, because this is a rare instance where an official competitive rule set and a fan-made, grassroots competitive rule set both exist at the same time. Usually, it's one or the other. Smash Bros. Doesn't have an official tournament rule set, so it's entirely run by the fans. But bigger esports like League of Legends are all about their official competitive rule sets. So why does Pokémon have both? It's actually a pretty interesting question. Official competitive Pokémon formats have existed for a long time, since the very first game in the series in fact. The Nintendo Cup 1997 format was played for the very first games over in Japan, with a Bring 6, Pick 3 rule set, similar to that of modern Battle Spot singles. Check out this video by Freezeye for a deeper dive into the first ever competitive Pokemon metagame. Later on, there was a competitive format played on the Pokemon XD Gales of Darkness GameCube game, where players connected their Game Boy Advance to the console in order to play. Bizarrely, Hulk Hogan was present at one of these tournaments. Check out this footage from the channel Nick Harper Pokemon. It's a very strange sight. At this point in time, the official side of competitive Pokemon was more like a one-off novelty than a real esport supported by the developers. Training competitive teams in-game was a Herculean task that took weeks sometimes to breed for perfect IVs and EV train all of your Pokemon. And it's not as if all that effort was even worth it, with tournaments very rarely being held and not having that much reward for participating or winning. But the interest in playing Pokemon competitively was still there, and the difficulty of getting into it at the time, exacerbated by the lack of Wi-Fi battles on the Game Boy Advance, led the community to create their own solutions. This was the very early days of Pokemon Battle Simulation, PC programs that allowed you to build your own perfect Pokemon team without spending all that time grinding, and start playing against other players online instantly. Very early battle simulators existed in IRC chat rooms, and then NetBattle emerged, a battle simulator with actual graphics. Back then, this was the only real way to play competitive Pokemon in a reasonable capacity, and I'd say this is when competitive Pokemon's most fundamental ideas started to take form. Theory behind team structure, prediction, and just how to play this game started to develop. And the format players decided on for these battle simulators was 6v6 singles. They wanted to mimic the format played with friends in link battles, and that's exactly what they did. And that's why 6v6 singles is the preferred format for competitive singles to this day. It has a history, and it's the way the game itself was played back then, and how casual multiplayer battles were always played. It was just logical. Competitive singles really took off around Gen 4, when Wi-Fi battles did exist, and the all-new Pokemon simulator called Shoddy Battle hit the scene. Much like back in Gen 3, most players at the time wanted to play 6v6 singles. Even though VGC formats with the doubles, Bring 6, Pick 4 format did exist, they were less accessible and unintuitive for many. If you wanted to play a Wi-Fi battle with someone, you were probably going to play it with the default rules of 6v6 singles, so that's what people did, and that's what the metagame formed around. The Smogon singles community started to form around this time, where rule sets were established and agreed upon. The usage-based tiering system that delegates different Pokemon to different tiers based on how often they are used was also established, as were different formats like Ubers, where banned legendaries can be used, and the overused format, the main competitive singles format moving forward. Gen 5 is where Pokemon's official VGC format started to receive more attention and be pushed a bit more, but competitive singles was also growing. Pokemon Online was a new simulator that came out, and then the most famous Pokemon simulator of all, Pokémon Showdown, finally released. Pokémon Showdown was and still is the easiest and most accessible way to jump into competitive Pokemon. It's browser-based, making it easy to just load up. You can build a team and queue up to find a ranked game in mere minutes. The UI is much better, and random battle is even a format where you don't need to build a team to start playing. This is around when I got into competitive Pokemon, and the choice between the two ways to play wasn't really a choice, to be honest. I had a copy of Pokemon Black, but the idea of spending weeks getting a competitive ready team that I didn't even know would be good and playing in real life tournaments versus just playing Pokemon Showdown quickly and easily for free was no hard sell. Doubles was unfamiliar to me. 6v6 singles is the way I'd played the games my entire life, so playing competitive in this way just seemed like a logical next step. Moving forward, VGC started to become more accessible, with many mechanics introduced that sped up the process of getting competitive teams. New systems for perfect IVs, EV training, and changing natures on your Pokemon. A sense of prestige towards VGC events also seemed to rise, as it was the official way to play, according to the Pokemon Company. Playing on real hardware with in-game graphics and animations, face-to-face with your opponents in an actual venue, is an appealing idea, and doubles is a format with a lot to appreciate about it. With more Pokemon on the field at a time, more complexity is possible. You can target different Pokemon with your moves, including your own Pokemon. Many different combinations of Pokemon can work together in different ways. There's now an element of positioning to consider, and of course, plenty of doubles exclusive mechanics or concepts that work differently in doubles, like spread moves that hit both foes, Wide Guard, which protects from those spread moves, effects like Trick Room and Tailwind, which impact the entire field, and support your ally, moves like Follow Me or Helping Hand that provide support. Doubles is very interesting and pretty well suited to in-person tournaments for a few reasons. In the Bring 6 Pick 4 format, games go faster so events can run smoother, and it's more exciting for viewers, especially when you consider the lengthy animations of some moves. This is significant. 6v6 singles, on the other hand, played on real hardware, would take much longer. You can also conveniently lock in just one team for a VGC tournament and adapt to different opponents by picking different Pokemon for each game. This prevents matchup variance pretty well and allows every game to feel different, even though you're just bringing one team. Today, VGC doubles has grown significantly. It helps that the Pokemon tournaments themselves feel like much more big fun events, especially Worlds, which has a very high production value. In many people's eyes, the official nature of VGC makes it the true competitive Pokemon format, while Smogon singles is seen as a fake fan-made rule set. It's also undeniable that multi-time world champion Wolf Glick has had a significant role in growing interest for competitive VGC, becoming the face of the game as a well-known and strong player with a popular YouTube channel. I feel like if you bring up competitive Pokemon these days, Wolf Glick's name comes up in hand. The games themselves have never really acknowledged the competitive singles community, and new mechanics and ideas are largely balanced around competitive doubles now. This has created a lot of problems for competitive singles in the modern day. 6v6 singles in Gen 9 has a significant amount of balance issues that have been difficult to manage. Smogon has been stuck between a rock and a hard place. Every choice they make divisive and controversial. Balancing Gen 9 for 6v6 singles is a impossible task, and no matter what you do, it seems you'll confuse or infuriate a subset of people. Gen 9 OU has been difficult to follow and frustrating to play for a lot of people, with its constant rule set changes and bans, as well as attempts to create a balanced environment in a format that has unfortunately been neglected by the developers. Anti-Smogon sentiment feels like it's at an all-time high with Gen 9 OU. And OU has dwindled quite a bit in popularity compared to VGC this time around. So what do I think? Which is the better way to play competitive Pokemon? I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I want to start out by saying that I find the rivalry between these two competitive communities to be fundamentally a little bit silly. Some people seem to want Smogon and the 6v6 singles community to just stop existing altogether. This long-standing grassroots community born out of love for the game should just fade away into irrelevance, because it's unofficial and the games aren't balanced around this playstyle anymore. I think it's fine to disagree with decisions made by Smogon, but I feel like there should also be some acknowledgement and understanding that Gen 9 is a very hard game to balance around 6v6 singles, and nobody really has the right solution that fixes everything. Most VGC players are not this hostile, and don't care about alternate ways to play Pokemon, because why would you? But as a Pokemon YouTuber, I am exposed to a lot of this negativity around Smogon that is often very dramatic, as if Smogon is some sort of evil empire trying to force everyone to play by their rules for a reason that I'm not sure of. Smogon singles players can be nasty to VGC gamers as well, with an air of elitism about their format being superior. It's all very silly and unnecessary. Both ways to play exist for a reason and have appeal, I think that we can both exist without needing to fight. That being said, I am a competitive singles preferrer for a few reasons. When I first got into competitive Pokemon, singles was just the easier and more accessible format to pick up and play. I don't enjoy in-game grinding, and I don't want to mess around with hacking either, so I enjoy the experience playing on simulators. To this day, I stand by that. 6v6 singles is also not necessarily less complex than VGC doubles in my opinion, and I enjoy this style of play more. Although it's true that every turn in doubles is more complex, there are less turns in every game. The importance of each turn is greatly enhanced in doubles, and games are often decided by big predictions or even decisions like which Pokemon you bring to the game in the first place and what you lead with. Every single choice is more complex and more impactful in doubles, but in singles, games are longer. Not every choice is going to be complex, some are automatic and risk-free, but games go for a longer time, meaning there are more decisions to make. Some turns can be very complex. You have more time to feel out your opponent, and with more time in each game, you can play differently. Maybe you're playing a game of inches, making slow, safe progress, or making big predictions, trying to swing back into an advantage. I think singles offers variety in playstyles. Games can go for different lengths of time, and it's a pace that I prefer. I also like that in tournaments, you aren't locked into a single team and can bring more than one to a set. I'm also not a fan of the open team sheet system in VGC, as I think that hidden information is a really fun and important part of these games to me that can allow for real creativity. I also don't really care that Smogon is unofficial, and I don't think that detracts from it. Plenty of my favorite competitive gaming communities are unofficial grassroots scenes, and I always find it a little bit perplexing when people suggest this is a bad thing. I find grassroots competitive games endearing because they evolve on their own and are usually run by passionate volunteers. If someone gets a world record in Mario 64's 70-star format, is that a fake achievement just because this is an unofficial speedrun format created by a group of fans that Nintendo doesn't acknowledge? I don't think so. I don't think it matters if something is official or not. It still has value. I will agree that current gen OU is not a great format, plagued with balance issues even now, after so many bans. But the thing about competitive singles is that there are many different formats you can choose to play. Usage-based tiering means there are multiple formats within the current generation, where lesser used Pokemon can thrive in their own worlds. In VGC, there's just the one format everyone has to play. Formats do change every few months, but everyone has to play the current format while it's current. That makes sense for uniformity and an ongoing tournament scene, of course, but I prefer having the variety and being able to choose from multiple different formats I could play. I also love that the metagames of older generations are preserved on Smogon, and you can go back and play previous games in the franchise competitively. There are people who only play specific old gens and develop those metagames to this day. I of course love Generation 3. If I want to play an older game with older mechanics and options in VGC, it isn't really possible. There might be small niche communities who do so, but VGC tends to be all about the current format. I also want to address that one of the biggest critiques of Smogon that I see all the time is that they will ban things or create clauses instead of just adapting to the game the way it is. I find this strange because official VGC rules also have bans and rules in place to create a more balanced or preferable environment. Bring 6, pick 4 is in itself a rule. You are restricted to only 4 Pokemon each game. They have this rule in place for a reason, because they think it creates interesting decisions and speeds things up, which is what they want for their format, and that's fine. There's also an item clause. You can't have more than one item on a team in VGC tournaments. Why not just adapt to a metagame where you can use as many items as you want? Obviously, it's because this rule forces item variety and also creates interesting team building decisions. The same applies to VGC's other rules, like having restricted legendaries. VGC's rule sets are at least uniform and consistent throughout the entire format, but the argument about adapting to a rule set that doesn't change also doesn't really make any sense because VGC formats change frequently. Every few months there's a new regulation with new rules. Instead of sticking to one format and adapting to that, you now have to start over. This is obviously to keep things fresh and see different Pokemon from format to format. It has its purpose. It feels so obvious to say, but rules exist for a reason, and they define what the game even is. Both formats use rules, bans, and clauses in different ways that I think both have their appeal. When I spoke with fellow Pokemon YouTuber Freezeye on my podcast The Fridge, he explained to me why he prefers playing in VGC formats. I value his opinion on this because he has experience in both communities as a great Smogon singles player and a great VGC player, and I don't think he's particularly biased towards either community. Freezeye prefers VGC events largely because you are committed to just one team for the whole event. Constantly building new teams in competitive singles can be tiresome, and you'll often end up bringing a half-baked team idea to a tournament game just for the sake of bringing something new your opponent isn't aware of. Matchup variance and counter-teaming are also things that happen in competitive singles, which can sometimes be annoying. In VGC, that single team system has its appeal, and a single VGC team can often be built to cover just about everything in the metagame. In many ways, this is a cleaner system for team selection. Freezeye also prefers the gameplay, pace, and decision-making of doubles, which is very different to singles, obviously, and more fast-paced. In real-life events, it is also harder to cheat. Ghosting, or being told what moves to make by someone else, is a hard thing to police in competitive singles, where games are just played online from the comfort of your own home. In a real event, you can't do that. Calculating every single turn using damage calculators for perfect information is also not possible in real events, which some players prefer. In competitive singles, this is a common practice. Whether you prefer playing singles or doubles, competitive Pokemon has certainly come a long way from its roots back in 1997. A grassroots competitive scene coexisting with an official competitive scene is a very unique case. But there doesn't need to be conflict between us. The fact that Pokemon can be enjoyed in so many different ways is wonderful, and I think we should just enjoy these games however we want.